our subject this morning, I'm told, it's Rabbi Haas is with us, I see by the video, as well as a couple other people. So good Shabbos, those of you who are in video land. I hope you have access to the sheets. We have a strict time limit, so we're going to get started. With your permission, what I would like to do is to give a little bit, since this is Shabbos Bamidbar, we start Bamidbar this week. And I warn you, if I slip into, I'm going to work mainly in English, but if you need to look at the Hebrew or the Aramaic and you have questions based on that, please feel free. I do slip into strange languages without realizing it, so if I do, please stop me. Don't be afraid. I also do not be afraid to ask questions. In the Talmud, it says that the bashful cannot learn and the impatient cannot teach. So I promise not to be one if you promise not to be the other. My intention this morning for the hour that we have together is to give a brief view of Bamidbar in general, and at least one of the issues that comes up about Bamidbar. There are, of course, dozens and dozens of issues that come up during the course of the book. But then to dig in to a question that arises from the first of the senses, right? Because our teachers teach us that when you see an anomaly, when you see something that's different, and this is some of medieval Jewish philosophy, you see something that's different, that is meant to draw your attention to something. And so that occurs very early in the book, and the Bible, teaches us to look at this little phenomenon in the text and cause us to delve deeper into what the role and the function of at least one of the tribes is. So that's what I'm hoping to do this Shabbos in the next little bit less than an hour now. And if that's okay to everybody, and please introduce, and rather than taking time to introduce around the table, because I have reached the age where I don't remember anything anyway, I was just kind of introduce yourself on the way around, okay? Or as you have questions or stuff like that. I'm hoping that you all know each other. The book of Bamidbar, there's two different ways that biblical books get their names. Basically two different ways. There are several ways, but one of the classic Hebrew way is by the first significant word or phrase in the book. I'm telling you stuff you already know. I don't have to teach this through that. Therefore, Bamidbar in the wilderness. There's a whole question of what does it mean to be in the wilderness, which is a discussion for another time.
Yeah.
The Bamidbar, but the rabbis called it Sefer HaPikudim, the book of counting. Right, the book of counting. Because the rabbinic terms, which eventually become the Latin terms, which eventually become the English terms, tend to be more descriptive of the contents of the book, as opposed to what the first word or so is. So it's for Lamashal, for example, Shmot means names, but what did the rabbis call it? Sefer Yetzias Mitzrayim, okay? The book of getting out of Egypt, and therefore the Greek, and then the Latin, and then the English call it the Exodus, which is a Jewish name for the book, right? But it is a descriptive name of the contents as opposed to just what the first word is. Just two different ways of naming books in the ancient world before we had copyrights and that sort of modern jazz. And that sort of thing. So the rabbis call it Sefer HaPikudim. Now, what does the word pikud mean? What can it mean in Hebrew, both biblical as well as modern Hebrew? A, Kuf Dal, pikud.
Fixing, to fix, repair, no.
No, not quite. That's
Avoid.
tikkun, that's tikkun. Tikkun olam actually means to, straighten the world, although the original term has to do with mechanics. Literally, do with mechanics. When anybody tells you tikkun olam, what should you ask them? Where's your wrench? Okay, where's your wrench? Or hammer, because the biblical word tikkun literally means to take something that is bent and straighten it out. Okay, that's what it means. So it means to repair, but in a very mechanical sense of repair. So somebody tells you tikkun item, all right? The first question, where's your tool set? Right, that's the first question you have to ask them. How are you gonna fix the world without a good wrench? That's the question, all right, or a set. Harbor Freight, cheap, not the best stuff, but for most applications, it's perfectly fine. I'm recommending, they opened the new one, you know where the guitar store was?
Yes.
On Mayfield, it's now a Harbor Freight, not a very big Harbor Freight, all right? But there's a bigger one on the west side in Parma. All right?
And then also on the Streetsboro.
What? Yeah.
Streetsboro, at least there was one.
In Streetsboro.
Yeah.
Yes, I know that from the time I used to go out to Kent. All right, so the word pakad, right? The pakad, right, can mean to count, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It also can mean to appoint, to give somebody a job. All right, in modern Hebrew. Yeah, clerk, or clerk, or as the accursed British would say, a clerk. All right,
Isn't it something?
a mifaked is a commander, right? A mifaked is a sergeant, that's correct.
That's inspection.
Mifaked could be that too, but mifaked inspection in the sense of making sure everybody's at their appointed job.
Right.
But a mifaked is a sergeant, okay, a mak, okay? Mifaked kita, mem kaf, is the commander of kita, of a small group, okay? A small group, so that's usually what we would translate to be a sergeant. Right, so if you're gonna become a sergeant in the IDF, you gotta go to the mock course makim, okay, which is course mifaked kita. Our son's a sergeant. So pakad, but also like a low-level clerk, if you go to the Department of Motor Vehicles, hospital show them, if you have to go there. If you have to go there, you come up against a pakid or pakida, okay, a low-level clerk who gives you as much a hard time as they possibly can.
That's their job.
Right, that's their job. So it could mean to give somebody, what is your tafkid? Right, okay, what is your tafkid? Is what's your job? What's your function? Right? And it could be a high-level function, or low-level function. So pakad, to count, simply count, 1, 2, 3, or it can mean to count, count in terms of what your job is, or to give you a job, to assign a job. And so a lot of rabbis correctly dosh on the idea that Sefer HaPikudim is not just a question of counting, but a question of everybody in the camp having their role, having their assigned function within the Am Yisrael, within the community of Israel. Yes, sir. What's your name, sir?
Elliot.
Yes, sir.
Zinner, not sinner.
Zinner, like the accounting firm?
Pardon me?
Like the accounting firm?
Yeah, no connection.
No connection, all right, you're forgiven.
With this emphasis on counting, why are you not supposed to count people in the minyan? Not one, not two. So it seems like it's a way of getting around that. Seems contradictory.
Right, so Brother Dinner, would you hold that? It's a great question. Would you hold on to it for a minute? Okay, because I'm gonna get to that. All right, but don't let me get away with anything. All right, if I don't get to it in the next 6 minutes, stop me. You got it, okay? That was a big deal, but it's great. That's a good, important question. All right, so let's just look at the first couple of lines of the book of Bamidbar. V'daber Adonai el Moshe, the first day of the second Bamidbar Sinai, B'ohel Moed, B'echad l'chodesh hasheni, B'shnat hashenit l'tzei tam me'al tzitzoyim. On the first day of the second month, in the second year, following the Exodus from Egypt, God spoke to Moshe in the wilderness. That's what we used to call him Moshe in Brooklyn. In the wilderness of Sinai, in the tent of meeting, and he used to. All right, so God speaks to us. So notice where we're at. We're 2 years since the Exodus. All right, 2 cycles into the Exodus, which I think we can in my opinion only, you don't have to agree, is that we can pretty much accept this Shana as a year in the sense that we think of a year of 12 months. That is not always the case in the biblical text.
Because during the book of Leviticus, there was no moon at all.
Well, right, correct. They sat for Tzvei for 2 years, and then so this is the second year in the sense of, I think, in the sense, the word Shana is difficult, as I'm sure other rabbis or other teachers here have taught you. The word Shana means a cycle. I don't know. I don't always know what cycle they're talking about. In other words, when it tells me that somebody was 400 years old, maybe they're talking about moon cycles. Right? I don't know what cycle.
This is the second month, or the second month of the second year.
First day of the second month.
First day of the second
year.
month. Okay, of the second year. Right.
Right. What's the first month?
Nisan.
Nisan. Is the first month in the biblical count. Remember that until we get infected by Hellenistic thought, the concept of time is not what we think of, but the concept of time is a circle. All right. Ancient religions, native religions tend to have a view of time that is a circular view of time, and not a linear view of time. That's a Greek invention, which the Jews as well as everybody else picked up on. But when you're reading ancient literature, you have to understand that when it says Shana, it doesn't mean from 2023 to 2024. It's a circle, and even to this day, primitive religions tend to still.
It also goes by who the king is, or who the leader is.
The king.
Always in the year of such and such.
Well, that's the way we do that, all right? I mean, we still do that. Legislation, if you look at actual text of legislation, American legislation, to the extent that Congress does that anymore, it says in the year of our, in the 200 and whatever year of our independence, if you look at British legislation, right, Yamach Shmam V'Zichram, if you look at the British legislation, may God punish them for all the evil they brought to the world. It says in the year of the King Charles III. All right. By the way, you know why he got the prostate thing? Because they drive on the wrong side of the road. Yes, sir.
This may be a little bit off.
Everything's off. You got me here. Everything's off.
Genesis, didn't that break that there was a beginning? That wasn't a cyclic nature of the world, that there was a beginning, God created the earths. And
No, but then that sets off a cycle that then continues.
Right. It's always the
It's
same.
always a cycle. Word Shana does not mean year in the Greek sense that we use it. It means a cycle.
But in the Jewish, in the Tanakh, it becomes linear, right?
No, it
In other
doesn't
words,
become
there's a
linear until the
purpose.
rabbi. It doesn't become linear until. That's why it's so hard to interpret.
but isn't
Why?
there a conflict here? But
Yeah. Yeah, it's a real conflict. It's a conflict of two different worldviews. Messianism, whether it's Christian Messianism or Jewish Messianism is not possible until you have a linear view of time.
In other words, a purpose.
Okay, because Messianism implies that the world starts at one place, or the universe starts at one place and ends at another, which is only possible if you have a linear view of time. So first you have to get a linear view of time. Who brought us that? Big Alex, right? Alexander, son of Philip, right? Alexander of Macedonia, the one between Greece and Turkey, not the one down 271. Alexander, he didn't come from this one so far as I can tell. Good morning, good Shabbos. Alexander of Macedonia, also known by his friend simply as Big Alex, okay? It brings into the, that movement of thought, brings the idea of linear time, and Messianism is only, in the sense of the Jewish, Christian, Islamic sense of Messianism, is only possible after you have a linear view. I don't want to get too hung up on this, it's an important subject.
Well, what about the idea of from slavery to freedom?
Okay.
From Egypt to Canaan to the promised land, that implies a linear sense of purpose. No?
They have dut l'cherut, from darkness to light, and you can be going this way.
But it's,
What kind of
there's
party-
some,
what-
but there's some, the implication is progress, some kind
Of going forward.
It's in our head, that's not in the text. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that, but they're thinking of time as a circle.
Mhm.
And you can progress through the circle, but it doesn't mean this time is necessarily going in a straight line. I mean,
Uh-huh.
you drive a car that was built after the 1970s,
I hope.
do you?
worse.
You do. Oh, well, not some of us don't. Okay, so you have a coil spring. Right?
Mhm.
It's circular, all right? Some people said in the older cars had leaves, and some trucks still have leaf springs, right? Which were a straight line. Okay? It turns out, okay, that there were people who never thought coil springs would work. Because you had to have a straight line. But the physics and the engineering shows us laws. That not only works, but in many cases, for
Yeah,
most
but-
applications, it works better. So don't be hung up on the straight line thing too much.
I understand, but Abraham, God
From point A to
chooses
point B.
Abraham, and we move forward away
Abraham
from.
was using a Mac. Wasn't using. All right, I would like to move on from this if we may, all right? Because it's a very important debate, but it's the whole shift from biblical to rabbinic.
One quick philosophical question in terms of the circular concept of time. How does that do with optimism? There'll always be an Amalek. There'll always be war. How does that deal with Yolenu and the idea that we will all recognize one day we are children of God and we can live together respectfully side by side?
Which is where the term tikkun olam first comes up in Zechariah, in Zechariah, and that's what it really means. We're gonna fix the world by getting to show them that they should do it our way. That's what tikkun olam means. Anyway, I leave that to the liberals. So we got the timing, all right, let's get back on track a little bit. We've got the timing, it's 2 years out of Egypt. And then, of course, the middle 38 years are a blank, right? We don't know because the story stops and then it picks up 2 years before we get to Devarim, which I'm not going to get into Devarim at all today. That's a whole other issue. 2 years before we get to Devarim. So really, when we talk about the book of Bamidbar, in terms of the flow of the Hebrew history, we're talking about the first 2 years after Egypt and the last 2 years before entering the land. Right? The rest of it is blank.
It's a transitional period.
Whatever, yeah, presumably, yeah. I mean, the Jonathan Sachs, I'll have to show him. I had a good piece that was rerun this week. They're rerunning his stuff because El's trying to gestorben, so they're rerunning his stuff. You know, we live in an age, some of us who are, whose hair is gray, we live in an age that thanks to technology, there are more dead people entertaining more live people than ever before in human history. You know, look, turn on channel, public television when they're raising money, and they'll show you all the dead people still entertaining.
Yeah.
All right, it's not that we didn't have entertainment from dead people before, there were other ways of doing it. And, all right, so that's where we are. God commands Moses to take a census for the purposes of military service, which means 20 years old. It's defined later in the text. I'm not making it up. I'm not that smart. Which is defined as 20. So the age of majority, I'm just going to throw this statement out. I'm going to let your rabbis fill in the details. The age of majority in the Bible is 20. Every society has an age of majority somewhere, depending on what purpose, somewhere between 18 and 21 or 22. That seems to be a human phenomenon. And then just depending on where you are and what you are and what the subject is, it's, can be anywhere in that range. But it generally seems to be, within that range. So we're already in trouble. All right, Mr. Zinner asked the question about counting, right? We're already in trouble because people worry, right, about being counted, right? Where do we see this problem? We see it in America, right? Every 10 years when the census comes around, all kinds of political issues come up around the census, all right? Where else do we see it, all right? We see it if a landlord comes to a tenant in his or her building and says, I'm looking at you. Not good news for the tenant, right? If the cops come, all right, and say, we're looking at you, they're noticing me as an individual. You know what they call that in Swahili? Gefehler. It's bad, all right? It's bad. So nobody wants to be identified, right? We didn't allow personal income tax in this country until the beginning of the 20th century, right? It was unconstitutional. The debate that took place over that constitutional amendment was fierce. The government is going to count me, is going to look in what's in my pocket, not in how many doors I have or how many hearts I have or whatever, right? Right? Remember how they used to charge you for water in New York? How many people remember that?
What, you mean that?
They charged you for water by the spigot in New York.
Not
So what people used to do is they used to put one spigot in the basement and then run hoses off of it. So they only got charged for one spigot. All right? I remember my grandfather, Allah Shalom, had that set up. All right, so that you only got charged, but it was a per spigot, not Chas v'Shalom how much water you actually used. All right, you could run that spigot 24/7 for all they cared. All right, so there were different ways of counting, but the idea of an individual count is always been fraught with political problems. And remember, up until the modern, governments are not counting individuals. Right? The idea of a regular census for most countries doesn't come about until somewhere in the 19th century. Right? You had groups counted. You had groups counted. All right, you counted the Jews, right? You counted the Jews in general, and then the Jewish community, as well as other groups, not just us, right? Then paid a group tax to the Malchus, to the kingdom. Right? That was the function of the Stadlan. That was the function of the representative of the Jewish community to the government, who or whatever the government was at that particular time. Right? That was how it worked. So as soon as the book starts out with God tells Moshe to take account, there's a shrinking to us. We're already in big trouble. Right? We know there's trouble coming because we don't want this. Where else do we see this, by the way? One other reference before we move on, that you should be all familiar with. Luke 2 from the Gospels, right? Was is gesucht auf Luke 2?
Oh,
In Yiddish, that question.
no, it's not.
What? Luke 2.
Luke.
Luke.
Oh.
Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the synoptic gospels. Christian, I'm talking Christian stuff now. But that's the, say, Caesar Augustus declares the census. Okay? Which is what gets Mary and Joe, we used to call him Joe, okay? Which got Mary and Joe, there are people that talk about Joe Lieberman, but not, I'm talking about Joseph. They gets Mary and Joe to come back to Bethlehem because you gotta go to the town of your origin in order to be counted.
And King
The
David.
whole Jesus Christmas thing in Bethlehem starts out with a census. So they got to take themselves from the Galilee and get down to Bethlehem in order to be properly counted. They applied, I understand that Mary and Joseph applied to be counted via their cell phone, but they wouldn't accept it, yes.
Yeah, Rabbi, since you bring up things along Christian lines, how many of the gospel writers were contemporaries of Jesus, or was it all?
Very, very few, but that will get us too far afield. And I still, I owe you a thought, anyway, an answer anyhow, or something else. That, the answer is only one or two of them, Luke and Matthew. It's all afterwards. That's not the issue. Anyway, I don't want to get off into that. All right, now, let's look at the Haftarah. Okay, because what do we know? The Haftarah, and this, Mr. Zimmer, gets to your question. Is it Mr. or Doctor?
Ellie.
Ellen, okay, all right, I always like to, it's important to go vote for somebody else, rather than myself, right? All right, so this gets us right to the question, right? And the Haftarah is important, as I'm sure you all know, because you have wonderful rabbis here, I'm sure have taught you this. The Haftarah is a commentary on the Torah portion. Sometimes the rabbis are agreeing with it, sometimes they're disagreeing with it, whatever it is, it's a commentary on the Torah portion. And so the commentary to the Torah portion, so the Haftarah, the regular Haftarah for this Shabbos, which will be read shortly, is from Hosea. Right? Hosea, who was married to
Prostitute.
a prostitute, exactly correct. Okay, Rana Brothel. The number of the people of Israel will be like the sand of the sea. Hol is sand, right? Holon, sand city. The sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or counted. And instead of being told you are not, all right, then it goes on to this relationship between God and the people of Israel, which is strained, right? And just to point out, especially for the gentlemen, although the women are certainly not excluded, at the end of the Haftarah, we see the line that has nothing to do with my discussion of the Torah portion. Ve'esticha li le'olam, ve'esticha li b'tzedek u'b'mishpat u'b'chesed u'rachamim, ve'esticha li be'emunah v'yadata et Adonai. All right, what is that? Where that's from? That's in this week's Haftarah. Where do we? When most of the gentlemen, but may include the ladies. When do we say that?
Wedding.
What?
The wedding.
At a wedding, we have allusions to it. At a steel holiday, it's not the same in the wedding, that's a
Is it at a bris also? No.
when you put the tefillin on your little finger. Right, that's what by tradition, when you're wrapping the tefillin on your hand, when you're putting it on your middle finger, that's your meditation. While you're putting your tefillin on in the morning, for those of you who didn't do it, well, put it Shabbos, you wouldn't put your tefillin on anyway. So the tefillin thing comes into this. All right, but now the question, Mr. Zinn, Dr. Zinn, Ellen, the question is, all right, does this say that Israel cannot be counted? Or, forget about the translation, right? Does this say that Israel cannot be counted, or it say that Israel should not? Because while the English translation here attempts to clarify it, the Hebrew is ambiguous. Right? Because anything that hasn't happened yet, how many of you go up to date on your Hebrew grammar? Okay, in Hebrew, anything that hasn't happened yet is future. So sometimes you have to know that this text is telling us something has not yet happened, or that something should not happen. And that then the rabbis come in to really bug us, right? It should happen, it should not happen, and that's what happens here. Right? Because, in my opinion, you don't have to accept it, right? Because of the overall concern about individuals being counted or singled out as it having some significance, right? The rabbis in the Gemara, particularly in Yom, I think I get the text in the packet, all right? Take this line from Hosea and other places and say, it doesn't mean they can't be counted, it means they should be counted. All right, and therefore you get this idea of, you get the minion in the morning, and it's this side, okay, not one, not two, not three, or, right, more likely is you get the idea that you're counting something else. So I want to skip, questions up, I just want to watch my time, well, it's 9:30. All right, the next page, has to do with Pidyon Haben, and the excess Levites. The excess firstborn for the Levites, the Machlifin, the exchange of firstborns, and so it's in this, on page 2, the Numbers, chapter 3, on stuff on page 2, which is in this week's Torah portion, but I'm not gonna go into it. You feel free to take it home or use it during services or whatever. That has to do with the Machlifin from which we get Pidyon Haben, because there were not enough, all right, Levites to redeem the firstborn. Remember, it's in this book that we switch from having the priestly class from being the firstborn. For those of you who grew up Irish Catholic, you're familiar with this procedure, right? I don't know how many of you grew up Irish Catholic. Maybe you did. The Italians too, but the Irish more so. Initially, the Kohanim would be the firstborns. They belong to God, just like the firstborn animals did. It's in this Torah portion, the beginning of Bamidbar, that we get that change, and there's an exchange, and there's money left over, and that's where we get Pidyon Haben, which I am not going to get into at all today. It was much too far away. All right, but if you take a look at page 3 in this text, the Yomah, and again, we're not going to read the text word by word, but you can take it home with you. Our services get boring. You can read it during services. There we get the Talmudic discussion, the Ellie that you referred to. There you get the Talmudic discussion that has to do with what? So you can count indirectly, right? So we see that, right? So you count indirectly. The Machatzit HaShekel, the partial shekel, which serves a whole bunch of other functions and purposes, right? It serves a whole bunch of other functions and purposes, but one of them is a way to count the people indirectly, right? You're not really counting individuals, you're counting households, but you're counting the number of households with a official coin. And then we see at other places, so that's the discussion. And these counts are not always good news. Right? The bottom of page 3 in Deuteronomy, Moshe Rabbeinu is complaining, right? That there's too many of them. On the top of page 4 in Judges, right, we see how the enemy is too much for us. There's too many of them, right? And these phrases, like the sands of the seashore, like the stars in the heavens, those phrases are biblical euphemisms, biblical phrases for when the number is too big. All right, when the number is too big to count. All right, and we have that occasionally, right? Right? What's pi? Right? We can't count it. Huh? We don't know. Okay, what's the volume of a cylinder? The answer is because I have to use pi to calculate it, which means I don't really know. I can get pretty damn close, right? I can get close enough to a number for GM to market the damn thing to me. All right, but I don't really know what the volume is because it's 3.14 repes gazin. They didn't teach in math, but the rest of it was Yiddish, but that's all it was. The, all right, but now let's get to our subject finally after half an hour. Please, could you grab me a little more cold? I don't want you to think she's a typical rabbit and she's the one you mentioned. I'm just a college student. All right, let's take a look at back to this parsha, the beginning of page 4 of your parsha. The parsha has a list of the count for each of the tribes. All right, and it tells us who the representative is of each of the tribes. It gives us names and it gives us a count. The count is almost always, and I'm emphasizing the almost, the count is
Same.
not the same. The count is rounded to 100 in general. It's 100 something. It's not, they don't give us exact numbers. It's like calculating the volume of your cylinders in your car, right? They don't give you exact numbers, right? But, and it's all hundreds, except for the tribe of God, where it goes down to 50, right? If you take a look at the third sheet on the quote on the page, right? I'm sorry, let's take a look at the numbers too. I'm gonna go backwards. I'm gonna do a little Merlin. All right, the second text on page 4 from the chapter, all right? The total enrolled in divisions for all troops are 603,550. Right? That's the count. Everybody says 600,000, but that's not right either, right? Because it's only the men who are over 20 or 20 or above. It doesn't count the women, doesn't count the children, whatever. Is it a hyperbolic number? Possibly. I don't know. I wasn't there. I've been always waiting to ask Moshe Rabbeinu about that, but I have not yet had the opportunity to put the question. All right, number 550. All right. Now, if you look at that list of tribes, which we're not going to do together, but you've got your chumash in front of you, please go ahead and do it. All right, they're all hundreds except for the tribe of God. The tribe of God, the chieftain of the gods being Elisaf ben Reuel, his troop is enrolled as 45,650. The 50 comes from one tribe. If you look at the very bottom of that page, right, you see the count later on after, all right, from Numbers 26, not our parsha, but later on in the book. What's 26 is after what? After the Cosby Zimri Pinchas story. All right, they're having sex in front of the tent. You think pornography is a modern invention? Okay, they're having sex in front of the tent, and Pinchas skewers them, right? And then there's a fight and a rebellion, and people die, and then we have God down to 40,500. But the initial count of God before that rebellion is 50, and it's the only tribe of the 12 that we have a 50. And so Jacob ben Asher writes immediately, he quotes Nachmanides, all right, with a question. So what should have jumped out at you with the text of Numbers 2 verses 14? What should have jumped out at you right away? Who's Reuel?
Yitro.
Yitro, right?
Yitro.
By some traditions, Reuel and Yitro, Moses' father-in-law, is the same person. Right? One of the problems in the text, however, is that in that text, it switches between Reuel and Deuel, whether it's a dalet or a resh. Resh could make us a connection to Reuel, which would be nice, but the rabbis don't quite pick up on that. Again, on my list of questions, when I get there. Right? But it may be that connection, but it's Deuel because it's a commentary and text on. It's okay that it's switching. Of course, even those of us who went to Hebrew school remember that kids confuse resh and dalet because they look almost the same. They look almost the same in the Torah script, Could be a scribal error. Actually, this could be the scribal error, or it could be somebody who had not doing it, but it already catches our attention. The 50, the odd number catches our attention, and the name catches our attention. And now, on page 5, right, here's the real issue. Here's the real thing. From 2 Samuel, this is not part of the Torah I'll have to read for today, but it's related. From 2 Samuel, what do we get? We get King David screwing up. That's a technical halachic term. What's his screw up? He pulled a census that God didn't tell him to pull. And here's your problem with counting. Because you're bringing attention to, there's all kinds of problems if you're counting individuals, unless God told you specifically to do it, or to count households. And that's where we now embed, and some of you are studying Samuel with Sue Weiner, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, who here is studying? You're studying with Sue, she's a great teacher. You're lucky, it's a bracha to have her as a teacher, all right? So, I mean, I'm sure if Sue hasn't gotten to this yet, she will. So David screws up, but then it turns out, okay, that who is the Roeh? Who is the prophet who was advising David at this time? It's a fellow called God. So there is some connection with God being the yoetz, being the advisor to King David, the Roeh. He's described as a Roeh, as a seer, which is a lower level prophet. That is the one who helps David to figure out, and God offers David 3 punishments. You know, it's like when I was a day camp counselor. The kid did something wrong, they'd have to select their own punishment. Probably considered an act cruel to do that today. But I was a day camp counselor in the last century, so. But he offers him things, and David decides to make sacrifices, whatever, to get out from under this one of David's many screw-ups. And what is the end of the story at the bottom of the text that you have in Hebrew on page 5 and in page 6 in the packet? What's the end? What's the ultimate penance that David he goes to this guy Aruna and buys his threshing floor. Where is that threshing floor? Temple.
It's a temple.
Yes. It's the rock that's under the that we believe the temple's. Not Al-Aqsa. Right? Which is where we believe the temple stood. It is in Western religion, Judaism, Islam, Christianity, it is the umbilicus, right? It's where heaven and earth connect. Some good comes out of it. In Exodus 16, in the middle of page 6, God is the Hebrew word for coriander. For those of you who can get it at Trader Joe's, told, God is the coriander, and it used to describe the taste of the manna.
Oh.
All right? All right, it's used to describe the taste of it. But if we really want to understand what the word God means in the context of the name, we have to look in 2 different places. We have to look in Genesis, when God gets his name initially, right? We have to look in Genesis when Jacob was blessing his children at the end of his life in Mitzrayim, in Egypt. And what's the 3rd place? Come on, kids, turn the page. It's right there for you. In Devarim, at the end of Deuteronomy, when Moses is giving his blessing and description of each of the tribes. Right? So why are we concentrating on God? Just to remind you, we're concentrating on God this Shabbos, the tribe of God, because it's got this weird number. Right? Tavos is at 50. Everybody else is rounded to hundreds. By what zechus or by what onish, by what merit or demerit, has God been pointed out to us as a different kind of tribe? So let's take a look. Let's see how God gets his name initially. V'tera Leah ki amda miledet. Leah, see, I'm gonna do the Hebrew on this one because I think it's that important. Just wanna keep track of the time. 1, 2. Leah sees that she's not getting in shit. She's not gotten pregnant again. V'tikach et Zilpah shivchata. She takes Zilpah, her maid servant, or as one teacher used to say, assistant wife, right? What do they call it in baseball?
Designated hitter.
Oh, a designated hitter, thank you. Because I don't know anything about, right? And she gives her to Jacob as a wife, meaning she's a surrogate, here, Jake, have it with her. Maybe she'll get pregnant. Okay, but biblically, there was exactly no problem with this. Right? This is what you do, especially if you're rich and you want to build up your tent. Sarah does it, right, with Hagar. Later turns into problems, which is why it's not recommended today. But
Or the
what?
commandments.
What?
No, this is not adultery. This is not adultery. This is totally kosher. Woman wants to have more children, credited to her. Right? She's not getting pregnant. You send in a designated hitter. That's the term, designated hitter. You send in a designated hitter. It's not a big deal. Okay, you're getting very Protestant on me right now. Don't get so Protestant. Okay, all right. And Zilpah, it's just Zilpah gets pregnant. Sorry, I don't know how to English that. All right, the Shirchalea, and she has a son for Yaakov. All right, so he's credited. This is all of them. But Tomer Leah, and Leah says, "Ba God." Okay, and now joy has come. Was there a play, Joy in the Morning, or something like that? 1960s. I'm old.
Joy comes in the morning.
Joy comes in the morning. Thank you. So you're better off than I am. Right? See, some people still function. So it's joy. But the Chad Shmo God, and she names him God. She's joyful. She has another baby. It doesn't matter how the baby gets there, as long as she's got the baby.
It was Rachel that was having a problem.
No, they were all having. No, Leah wants to catch up. They're both having problems. This is Leah's via Zilpah.
She'd already had 4 children.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
What's the difference? I want another one. There's a chart. Somebody did a chart years ago. It was like a scorecard of which wife, which shivcha, whatever. But remember, it's getting credited to the wife, to the senior wife. Not yet, it's just senior rabbi, assistant rabbi, so that's like that. Right? Vatele Zilpah, shivchat Leah, and Leah gets Zilpah, the maidservant or the assistant wife of Leah. She gets pregnant once more for a second time with Yaakov. There's no adultery there. She had sex with another guy, that would be adultery. I know, sorry, I didn't write it. But Tomer Leah, and then she says Asher. Okay, Asher, I didn't push forward. All right, so Gad and Asher are the biological children of Zilpah. All right, the maidservant of Leah. Right, but legally they are the children of Leah. But of course, what really matters is they are the children of Jacob. But the name itself means some kind of joy, some kind of happy thing. So he's already there. But by the time we get to the end of the Devarim, by the time we get to the end of Deuteronomy, if you look at page 7, right, we have Moses' comment. And what does Moses say? Ulagad Amar, and with regard to God, now he's talking about the tribe, right? Because this is now 40 years later, 38 years later. Amar, he says, Baruch Marchiv God, blessed is the one who enlarges God. Marchiv from Rehov, right? Makes it wider. That's Broadway, right? Makes it wider. Levi as a lion cub, Levi is a young lion cub. Shahan v'taraf, Yishachan, he sits, he dwells, v'taraf, but he tears. Right? Taraf is to tear something. That's what the word trade comes from. All right? Where else do we see taraf?
Oh, after funeral, when we rip,
That's actually kriya,
oh,
okay? But
Okay.
you're right, and you're right physically, but it's a different word, kofreshayin. To tear, well, korea means usually is a verb, usually means to tear a garment or a thing. Taraf means to tear. When
The rip.
when the boys bring the coat of many colors, right, back to Jake, right? He says tarof taraf. Surely he has been torn up. Right? Treif means torn in terms of flesh. That's why treif means torn in terms of kashrus. But I'm sure your rabbis have taught you about that in kashrus classes. All right. To tear off arm and scalp. Hadkod is the round part. Right? So now Moses describes not the individual, but the tribe of God, okay, as one whose territory is expansive and who attacks like a lion,
And they want,
raids who sneak attacks.
and they want the land on the west.
Correct, right. The Bible, the Song of Ben Levi Chaim, asks the question, when does the diaspora start? And what's the answer according to some of the Levi Chaim?
God, Reuben, and the Reubenites, the God.
Ruvain, God, the Chatzi Menashe.
And
Menashe. The diaspora starts before we even settle Israel.
Right.
The diaspora is an essential part of Jewish life, but that's a very different subject. Okay, but God is right, but God is on the east side of the Jordan, but Moses has described it. Moses had, by the time you get to Deuteronomy 33, okay, what has Moshe told God? It's actually down in Deuteronomy 3, which is towards the bottom of the page. We won't read it together, but it's there, right? Reuben, Gad, and part of Manasseh have the responsibility of sending Chalutzim, which we think of as pioneers, but in the biblical context, it's shock troops, it's avant-garde. Okay, they have the responsibility of sending them, helping conquer the land, and then they can go back.
Right.
They're allowed to live in the diaspora, but they have a response.
how do you get from luck to tearing apart the flesh?
That's one of the questions I have for Moshe.
Okay, and also, how do you get from $50?
Because the 50 is meant to draw our attention
To
to
him.
God as a unique tribe.
Okay, that's it.
Correct. When you're reading the text, it should jump out at you.
Yeah,
Okay, wow, that 150 and everybody else is hundreds,
yeah.
right? You look for the anomaly. You look for something that's different. You look for what doesn't belong there.
I know.
I don't care if you're a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, a space scientist, whatever. When you're trying to figure something out, you look for something that's different. Something that's not there, that you don't expect. That's where we get this off of the 50. Right? Because it commands us to look further into what is God. What is God? All right. And then we get from Genesis, all right, which we saw already. God shall be raiders. Okay. God, Gadud. Now the word God also is related to the word Gimel Dal Dal. For those of you who studied your Hebrew grammar. And a Gadud, we talked about a mak. Okay. About a mifaked kita. Right? A Gadud is a brigade or a battalion. So a cot may be 20, 30 guys or 20, 30 soldiers, and the Gadud is 600 to 1,000 usually. Oh, they go in the army. So that's a larger group, right? So God, Gadud, Yagudenu, okay, and he shall raid. And here it becomes a verb. Right, the word verb, God now off of this becomes meaning a verb. V'hu Yagud Yaakov, and he shall Akev, root of Jacob means heel. So he grabs at their heel.
Hail, yes.
So now God, between all these texts, God has now shown us this is the group that are the raiders. These are the ones who go and perform these terrible missions. We have to go into the enemy territory. We'll see commentary to that effect. Right? Small groups, attack, withdraw. Attack, withdraw. And what's interesting to me, I don't want to get accused of running over service time. So if you take a look at the Chizkuni, it follows that. We won't take time to read it. The Rashi, it's the now, it's the Ramban, Nachman, it's page 8. A troop will troop out of him. Well, a troop here is using Gedud as a troop, meaning a group. Will troop back, meaning will return in its own tracks to the territory in peace. Not one of them will be missing. They'll go, they'll do what they have to do, and they will come back. Okay, those you read Danny Gordis a couple of years ago. Rabbi Gordis talked about having this conversation with his son. His son talking about going out of an evening, meaning going into someplace and coming back. That's the description. Here, all right, Jacob thus praised, I'm in the middle of the Ramban text. Jacob thus praised the God for their valor and their victory over all who enter on battle, do battle against them. All right, and then later on, I'm going to let you take this home and read it on your own. Talks about them getting a wide space and their battles with Amnon and Moab. Perhaps the prophet Jacob was alluding to the war of Yeftach, the Gileadite against the children of Ammon. So Ramban kind of expands it. And Sforno on the top of page 9 specifically refers. And then in Emek Davar, which is Hanatziv, Rabbi Naftali Berlin, who's was the yeshiva's in Berlin was for his family. The yeshiva still exists today. God Gadol Yagodno, which is what we get from the Genesis, right? That we're digging into the Genesis. He is God Aketh, God at the heel. Although the tribe of God will sit securely and not be afraid of the army of his enemies who will surround us, but will not be able to leave later. Rather, he is assured that the raiders, that God will protect us. They will surround us, but they will not, but he will strike at their heel. At the end, he turns them around and overcomes them. So these kind of raiders are necessary for the defense of Israel. These kind of raids and things. Any relationship to modern politics. Samson Raphael Hirsch, founder of modern Orthodoxy in the 19th century, right? Talks about God. Don forms the border guard against the Philistines in the west. And the wise men see Samson, the perfect type of fighter described in the previous verses, singular, clever, against the Gadad, to cut it, to suddenly drive into something, Gedud, and a detachment of troops, an area like the wedge. God sits quietly on the border, does not disturb his neighbors, but when attacked, he bravely repulses them, pursues them across the border. I think that is Malvin, another relatively modern commentator. Right? The Talons go ahead of the camp. I'll let you read this by yourself, and they attack at the heel. They attack at the back. And they're the snakes, they're also related to attack at the heel. And then finally, we'll end up with Yaakov Tzvi Mecklenburg. V'hu Yagid, and he's parsing the verses in Genesis. All right, it teaches a new thing. The V'hu introduces a new subject. Even though at the beginning legions will come against him, in the end he will indeed be reversed. The enemy will be reversed. For God will invade the lands of his enemies. Like one Zebulun right? The tribe of Zebulun with the ships will dwell on the shore for days. And he will always be found on the shore of other ships to trade to other ports. In other words, you got your spot, but every once in a while you gotta go out. So he's comparing God to Zebulun, right? This results in his making a good living, always having rich food. Zebulun gets rich from trading, right? Very typical Jewish thing. Not only this, but it was also give other delicacy. But in the opinion of Rabbi Wolf Heidenheim, it is that Yedudenu, okay, we're parsing the verses in Genesis 30:49, is like God's guests at the table. And it's like the star of righteousness. And I'm not sure what that means. I did not thoroughly research the star of righteousness. It's possible it should be capitalized in English, but I can't find too many references. That indicates it says it's not Rosenstrike, Star of Redemption. It's not. It's something else. Something, because look at its date. The guy's in 1832, so it can't be Rosenstrike. Right? It is related to the verb to band together. The sense of the text is that God will unify us. There will be unified behind the action of these small groups of raiders, and in the end, we will succeed. So I don't know if there's any relevance in this to anything that's going on in the world, but I thought that would be an interesting thing this Shabbos to look into. Postmates. Why does the Rabbi Shalom give us that number 50 there to stand out, so that this Shabbos we could delve into God and see what that means for us? Yes, we have time for a couple of questions. My God, it's because I was nasty. Oh, no, it's late. Yeah, but let me ask so, did I get your question?
Yes.
On the account? Yes.
Well, by Midbar, yeah, obviously, most of the book is about, fetching, complaining, and rebellion. But in the first 10 chapters, as Sachs and others point out, there's a semblance of order. Okay, in other words, the tribes are all situated around the Mishkan, right? And they're,
Right.
And the census.
Lots of people talk about that, which is why I did.
Right, and but it's brief. It's a brief
Yeah.
moment
There's
of
all kinds
order,
stuff
right?
going on there. But since this is
Right.
But since this is a unique opportunity, I thought
But we talked
looked at it
about the
as a
census, and that's
No,
another.
we talk about specifically why does the text direct our attention to Shavuos God? Why does it are all those issues there? Of course, is Jonathan Sachs right? Yeah, most of the time, but this Shabbos, I thought, given where we are in the world, that it was a good idea to focus on it. Why does the text draw our attention? Very subtle way. Why does it draw our attention to this particular tribe at this particular time?
Rabbi, this was a very engaging class. Hopefully you'll be back in the future so we can learn from you.
My revel in the fact that I control exactly nothing. I think I did all right in my exam. I had to take in school, Thursday in school. I have control over it, which is a great way to. All right, Trevor, thank you for your time and attention. Sheila, thank you for your support for this endeavor. And have a wonderful Shabbos and a good Shvius. Depending on this, and I make.
That's good.
Thank you.
Thank you.